the working class rising up. This is the ruling class punching down.
My day is bigger than your day.
First rule of gladiator school, bro. Don't punch down.
Charging into a goblin's
Hail Trump!
The threat from outside forces is far less sinister, dangerous, and grave than the threat from within.
Control your own body.
We will root out the communists, Marxists, fascists, and the radical left thugs that live like vermin within the confines of our country.
We can fight the entire banking system. Nobody can. But together, everybody can.
I did nothing wrong.
Welcome to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast, where we cut through the noise and help you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff. One of the phrases that you're going to hear a lot lately if you're studying the right-wing information sphere is the phrase, the woke right. That kind of seems like a contradiction because most of the right-wingers that you will run into aren't terribly woke. At least they didn't used to be. As you've probably guessed, they don't mean that these people respect pronouns, believe that systemic racism is a thing and that Black Lives Matter, or have stopped thinking of ways to exterminate trans people. What they mean by woke right is a little bit different. Now, we at the Did Nothing Wrong podcast have always maintained that if you want to understand your opposition, you have to learn to read them in their own language. This is a bit of an oversimplification, but seeing how they phrase things, how they put ideas together, will always be far more informative than reading anyone else's take on it. Now, this is something I figured out a long time ago and was reminded again of in 2016 because I was familiar with some of their ideas. I would say arguably more familiar than a lot of the media was at the time, and I remember feeling like there was this absolutely massive disconnect between the stories I was reading about what was going on and the rhetoric these people were actually spewing. Now, the other thing that you tend to notice when you study this stuff closely is that a lot of these people do not like each other. We've said this before about Nazis, that the only thing they hate worse than the Jews is each other. And if you go back and look at the history of, say, for instance, the white supremacist movement, you will absolutely see it. The big players and the leaders have never, ever liked the other big players and leaders in the movement. There's only a handful of people that have ever been associated with it that have been able to buck that trend, guys like Louis Beam, who were far more mission-focused and trying to build bridges. They happen, but they're super rare, thankfully. This is also true of most of the right wing. Now, for all the talk of unity, there's very little of it actually in practice, and I've heard a lot of theories as to why, and the one that I kind of believe, as much as anything anyway, is that it really comes down to spheres of influence. The right in the United States of America is a massive grift. This isn't something that you weren't already aware of if you listen to this show and many others, but I want to break it down a little bit. So there's a group of people that watch all the right-wing media, listen to all the podcasts, spend their time in a very online manner, and can be very easily directed by influencers. Now, this is not a new phenomenon. In the 1990s, Rush Limbaugh, RIP, had what they referred to as ditto heads, who believed in absolutely everything Rush was saying.
You are hearing as much as anybody the voice of the people because they call you and you're meeting them. What are they saying?
Well, it's a combination of things. You know, I think we're in the midst of a culture war right now, Pat, and the piece that you just had spells out the conundrum that exists for the voter today. We're in the midst of the reshaping and redefinition of the limits on our behavior. Who's going to set those limits? Who's got the right to set those limits? What the punishment for violating them is going to be.
What's old is new again, right? So there are a group of people who are absolutely credulous about this stuff. Check out their response to the Epstein Files scandal, for example. A few months ago, they were all stoked because they figured it was all going to come out. And the reason they thought this was because their influencers told them so. Stuff like this.
White logs tied to accused sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein have been released to some conservative political commentators. They walked out of the White House holding binders labeled the Epstein files. Now, it's not clear what's inside the binders and whether they'll be released to other media outlets. President Trump signed an executive order ordering that the files be released, but Attorney General Pam Bondi says the FBI hasn't turned over everything, and she's expecting more files tomorrow.
Look, I don't blame people that are so used to being lied to, thinking that, oh, we're never really going to get what the FBI has on the Epstein files. And we'll never get it all because the bad guy's been in control for decades and most of it's probably been destroyed. But 14 terabytes were retrieved 3 weeks ago when Pam Bondi and Kash Patel raided the FBI headquarters in New York. They made the head of it step down who was covering it up. And then she said, we've got truckloads of it. It'll take a few weeks to go through it. Well, she came out yesterday and said, we've identified hundreds of new victims. It'll take time to process. We got to take out their names, but we're investigating now, and those involved will be prosecuted.
This is phase one. What AG Bondi and with the Department of Justice, Kash Patel's office at the FBI, what they're doing is they're setting the stage for everyone. Now, whether or not this information, there's going to be nuggets, there's going to be new stuff, there's going to be old stuff, there's going to be all sorts of things in there, but we need to focus on the fact that this is full transparency, and this is how it works.
Now, this wasn't a particularly hard reaction for these people to get, because Jeffrey Epstein has been one of the big bads of their mythology ever since he was arrested the second time. It's never entirely made all that much sense to me that they can believe that somebody like Trump is cleaning up all the pedophiles when there's so much circumstantial evidence, at least, that he may actually be one. We know he used to hang out with them. He's made some really creepy comments about his daughter over the years.
Although she does have a very nice figure. I've said that if Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I'd be dating her.
So it made a lot of sense when Attorney General Pam Bondi staged a PR stunt and had a number of these people at the White House to promote what was supposed to be the upcoming release of the Epstein files, whatever that even means at this point.
This is a Fox News alert. The Epstein files have been released. Fox News senior national correspondent Kevin Corke has been pouring through all the documents. Kevin, what can you tell us?
Evening, Laura. I don't want to oversell this because I don't think there's a whole lot to sell, at least so far. We'll probably learn a lot more tomorrow morning by that 8 a.m. deadline that the AG has given the FBI in New York to turn over everything in their possession. But let me back up for just a second. The Attorney General, you recall last night, called it breaking news. She promised that we would get the Epstein files today, and while that turned out technically to be true, what we've seen so far, critics have argued tonight, really hasn't lived up to the dramatic billing. Now, we began the day with somewhat high expectation, having seen some influencers with so-called Epstein file folders. But that began to fizzle just a bit because we really didn't get a lot of new information. So once we saw that, we wondered, what about the Attorney General's? Was she holding back? Well, she actually wrote a letter, Laura, to the FBI director, Kash Patel, suggesting that the FBI's New York office, which collected material from the SDNY, that's the Southern District of New York, it seemed to be, for lack of a better description, stonewalling, holding back key materials. Now, the FBI director, obviously concerned about this, went on X, and Director Patel wrote a fairly lengthy post in it. He said there'll be no cover-ups and no missing documents and no stone left unturned. And anyone from the prior or current Bureau who undermines this will be swiftly pursued. He went on to say if there are gaps, we will find them. If records have been hidden, we will uncover them, and we will bring everything we find to the DOJ to be fully assessed and transparently disseminated to the American people as it should be.
This is the kind of thing that absolutely gets the base hot and bothered. Then, a couple of months later, they changed their minds for reasons that we don't exactly know, so I guess it's just reasons, that they decided not to release those files, and not just not to release the files, but to straight up tell all of these people that there was nothing in them, and Epstein was not as bad as they had previously been led to believe.
Caroline, the DOJ and FBI have now concluded there was no Jeffrey Epstein client list. What do you tell MAGA supporters who say they want anyone involved in Jeffrey Epstein's alleged crimes to be held accountable?
This administration wants anyone who has ever committed a crime to be held accountable, and I would argue this administration has done more to lock up bad guys than certainly the previous administration. And the Trump administration is committed to truth and to transparency. That's why the Attorney General and the FBI Director pledged at the President's direction to do an exhaustive review of all of the files related to Jeffrey Epstein's crimes and his death. And they put out a memo in conclusion of that review. There was material they did not release because, frankly, it was incredibly graphic and it contained child pornography, which is not something that's appropriate for public consumption. But they committed to an exhaustive investigation. That's what they did, and they provided the results of that. That's transparency.
Follow up on that,
Sure.
Caroline. Okay, so the FBI looks at the circumstances surrounding the death of Jeffrey Epstein. According to the report, this systematic review revealed no incriminating client list. So what happened to the Epstein client list that the Attorney General said she had on her desk?
Well, I think if you go back and look at what the Attorney General said in that interview, which was on your network on Fox News.
I've got the quote.
Go ahead.
John Roberts said, DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen? And she said, it's sitting on my desk right now to review.
Yes, she was saying the entirety of all of the paperwork, all of the paper in relation to Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. That's what the Attorney General was referring to, and I'll let her speak for that. But again, when it comes to the FBI and the Department of Justice, they are more than committed to ensuring that bad people are put behind bars.
Now, a lot of people didn't believe this. They've been conditioned from years of propaganda to believe that Epstein is basically the devil. And, you know, that's not the most indefensible argument. So being told to ignore that really made a lot of people sit up and question what they had believed up to this point. And that's honestly a good thing because it means there's still some critical thinking left in there somewhere. But a lot of people didn't push back. They took that positively Orwellian tactic and just internalized it. So now all of a sudden, Jeffrey Epstein's not a bad guy to them. And it was actually probably Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden who were responsible for the whole mess.
Caroline, there's been a lot of discussion about the Epstein files and the president's comments yesterday calling it a hoax. Can you clarify which part of the Epstein hoax is the hoax part?
The president is referring to the fact that Democrats have now seized on this as if they ever wanted transparency when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein, which is an asinine suggestion for any Democrat to make. The Democrats had control of this building, the White House, for 4 years, and they didn't do a dang thing when it came to transparency in regards to Jeffrey Epstein and his heinous crimes. It was this president who directed the Department of Justice and the Attorney General to do an exhaustive review of all files related to Jeffrey Epstein, which they did. The Attorney General and the FBI, led by Pam Bondi, Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, these are great patriots, some of the most trusted voices in the Republican Party movement. It's part of the reason the president appointed them to these high law enforcement positions, and they spent many months going through all of the files related to Jeffrey Epstein, and they concluded what they found in that memo, which they drafted and they released. And so the president has been transparent. He has followed through on his promises to the American people, but he doesn't like to see Democrats and the mainstream media covering this like it's the biggest story that the American people care about.
That's how sprung these people are. We have always been at war with East Asia levels of sprung. It is the post-truth era now, and that is one hell of a scary concept. Here's philosopher Francis Fukuyama, you know, the end of history guy, remember that? Talking about it.
Someone mentioned this concept that I'd not heard of previously called a post-truth society, in which it's possible to assert things that have no factual basis. People will criticize it, you know, fact checkers, and it makes no difference whatsoever, that people will keep asserting it, and then other, you know, large numbers of people will keep believing it, even if it's not true. And that's an effect that's going to last way beyond the election, unfortunately. I think that once you sort of breach these norms, you're in this undefined territory where anything can go, and I don't think we've plumbed the depths of that, unfortunately. I think that a post-truth society it's a reflection of something deeper, which is the basic lack of authority or the decline of authority of institutions across the board. And this is not just in the United States, this is in Europe and other places as well. So if you think about the things that defined our society, they were corporations, labor unions, the family, churches, political parties. These were the things that structured our social and political life. Every single one of those, if you look at polling data over the last 40, 50 years, every single one of those institutions has seen a decline in the number of people saying they trust those institutions.
And looking back, this was bound to happen. Milo Yiannopoulos said something about it in 2015, and it kind of blew up a little bit from there.
Bloomberg Business Week, this big program from me ages ago, and I dropped into discussion in the course of like 2 days this phrase, post-truth era. And what I meant by it, what I was trying to say, was the facts are no longer enough. You have to also be persuasive and charming and funny and all the rest of it. That's what I meant by post-truth, post-fact era, whichever it was that they picked up. And it sort of went gangbusters after that. Certainly there seem to be two emerging sets of truths in America, and they're split fairly evenly down political lines, aren't they? And it's quite disturbing in some ways to sort of see the different versions of the universe described by, let's say, the New York Times and Breitbart, for instance.
So now we've gone from Ben Shapiro's famous statement about facts don't care about your feelings to the idea that facts really don't matter because they're what we say they are. And this is the faction in the GOP that's ascendant right now. MAGA fits right into this. And this isn't news to anybody that's listening to this show, but it's context. There's a guy named James Lindsay. You've probably heard of him, but in case you haven't, he's a scholar and a philosopher. He's also known for pranks. One of the first of these was a completely made-up study that he and his co-authors submitted to some journals, making fun of political correctness and woke, as he put it at the time. And a few of the journals absolutely ran with it. So, ha, libs owned.
We rewrote a section of Mein Kampf as intersectional feminism, and this journal has accepted it.
James Lindsay and these two others submitted fake research to academic journals. To their surprise, the journals published the paper.
This got him in the door and into the game, as it were. Now, part of the territory he staked out for himself here is anti-communism. Most of these people at least pay lip service to this concept, but their version of communism is public schools and fluoride in the water. And it really hasn't changed much since the days of the John Birch Society. And speaking of the John Birch Society, there's this guy, Seth Kotlar, you really ought to follow over on Blue Sky. He's a history professor at Willamette University. He's been tracking the far right in the Pacific Northwest virtually forever. That's Seth.Kotlar at bluesky.social. And I'll put a link to his stuff in the show notes. He has a lot of archival material from various newspapers in the area and right-wing flyers from the 1950s on up through the present day. And when you look at that stuff, you can see that they're constantly recycling a lot of the same themes. So that'll help remind you that this conflict isn't new. So as you may have gathered, Lindsay is one of those guys who sees communists around every corner. And one of the things he's been concerned about for a while is the creeping tendency that he feels like he's noticed towards communism on the right.
Basically, they saw that Marxism was able to exert tremendous power over the world. It's, in my opinion, through the woke on the left, threatened even America and the Western free nations very seriously, in that we're still in the grips of this tremendous problem. Woke on the left is not dead. It's entrenching and kind of waiting and biding its time. But they see that it worked to get the left power, and it's power that they covet, whether that's because they are ambitious themselves, whether because many of them are openly Machiavellian, for example, so they want to espouse that, deceitful lust for power, because power is all that matters, or realpolitik is all that matters in their opinion. And some of them, I think it's out of fear and desperation. We're so close to the brink. Desperate times call for desperate measures is the kind of old slang from the movie. But what I hear actually some segments of the woke right say, and we haven't talked about the ones who believe that it's Jewish power, of course, which is rampant and rife on social media, but these people are out there, and the slang now that I see on the internet is Weimar problems require Weimar solutions, which is a direct invocation of needing to re-engage the Nazi experiment, as I have come to call it as I study the fascists and the National Socialists, which of course is a tremendous mistake.
Ooh, what does he do about it? Well, he does what made him famous the first time. He wrote a paper in which he basically knocked off the Communist Manifesto and submitted it to a right-wing journal called the National Informer under the name Marcus Carlson. Get it? Karl Marx, yeah? I mean, he couldn't have really been any more obvious if he tried.
You rewrote part of the Communist Manifesto and submitted it to American Reformer, and they published it.
Yeah, that's right. So I wanted to test to see if my guess was right, that these guys were leaning into critical theory and Marxist analysis. So I took 6 pages of the Communist Manifesto and I just swapped out everywhere it says, the proletariat class. I took out proletariat class and put in New Christian Right, which is one of the things they call themselves. And then I took everywhere he talks about the bourgeoisie and I threw it out and I put classical liberalism. And I mentioned global trade and all this. Actually, Marx mentioned global trade and I just kept it in there and worked around it. And then I fiddled. If he talked about economics, I changed it to culture and faith and all of this.
But the journal actually thought it was great. And they ran it under the title of, quote, the New Liberal Consensus and the New Christian Right. Now, when the journal was made aware of what had happened, they didn't actually repudiate the piece.
Yeah, they didn't just publish it. When I came out on December 3rd last year and said, here's what I've done, I did this experiment, they published a piece of the Communist Manifesto so we can guess that the logic is the same that Marx used, they accepted that. They said, Marx is all over social media. Marx is a great writer. We need to use critical theory. We are postmodernists. And then on the American Reformer magazine itself, rather than taking the article down in shame or whatever they should have done responsibly, they switched the author's name to mine because I used a fake name, Marcus Carlson. Kind of on the nose.
Making fun of Marx and Tucker Carlson?
No, Marcus Carlson was the closest name I could think of that was Karl Marx. Just is the closest thing Tucker didn't cross my mind.
Now, Lindsay is the subject of a piece on all of this that recently dropped called The Woke Right Stands at the Door, written by Jonathan Rauch. And I think a lot of it is basically correct. Here's an example. Lindsay is among a growing number of scholars and intellectual historians talking about what they call the woke right. The notion is not that the far left and the far right share the same politics or goals. Rather, it's that the far right has adopted partially on purpose, but mostly through osmosis and convergent evolution, claims and strategies that parallel the far left's. The MAGA right has strange and sinister qualities that look nothing like the traditional religious wing of conservatism, familiar from the era of William F. Buckley, or the anti-government libertarian conservatism of Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan. Its anarchaic rejection of truth, its Nietzschean embrace of power as self-justifying, its unabashed anti-liberalism, and its glee in transgressing boundaries and giving offense are something new on the right. An embrace of postmodernism, which, until recently, was the exclusive property of the illiberal left. Here's Lindsay expounding on this idea with John Stoffel.
Why is it called woke? I just think of them as right-wing crazies.
Woke and crazy, those are kind of the two species of the same animal.
On the left, woke is, we've woken up to how privileged we white people are.
Right, so the right does it the other way. So this is in parallel to what we saw with the fascists awakening to fight communism in the 1920s and 1930s. The communists came along and said, well, there's privileged classes in society, the bourgeoisie, and you need to wake up and fight against them as the proletariat, the working class. And then the fascists said, hold on, everything's going bad. So we need to wake up that the liberal society, the free society, actually enables the communists, and we have to fight back the other way and set up a different kind of tyranny. So it's the same energy, but the other direction. A lot of people ask me, what is woke right? And it's really funny. It's simple, and everybody who's not kind of part of it understands it immediately. It's people on the right who who act like the woke left, who think like the woke left. So they've adopted critical theory, Marxist analysis, but they engage in the same behaviors. That's, the victimhood mentality, the cancel culture, struggle sessions, they bully people online with swarms, they rewrite history.
I honestly think that Hitler was a good guy based upon my own research, not my public education indoctrination.
He was trying to encourage community, encourage, family values.
This entire kind of litany of things that we've come to expect from abusive left-wing behavior over the last 5 years. Just imagine right-wing people doing it for allegedly right-wing causes, and you've more or less got it.
And what's really funny is that this one actually landed. Calling them fascists doesn't really bother them very much, as you may have noticed. Calling them racists, same story. But what they really, really don't like is being called woke. I don't know if it's because they've spent so much time bashing it or if the joke just hits a little too close to home, but these people are mad at James Lindsay.
Why is James Lindsay so afraid of the woke right, quote unquote? The so-called woke right, because he so calls them woke right. Christian nationalists is what he is objecting to. Now, I just want to begin. I don't really know what the woke right is supposed to be. It's pretty ill-defined, and I'm not a Christian nationalist. But what I am is an ex-liberal, and I see James Lindsay desperately clinging to a position that has basically become untenable and will not suffice to deal with the problems of the future.
The maddest of all of them seems to be a guy named Vish Bura, who's a convicted drug dealer, as well as the former communications director for Republican Congressman George Santos. Remember him? He's also the vice president of the New York Young Republican Club, at least I think he still is. These days, he's a producer for former Representative Matt Gaetz' show, among other things, I'm sure. Now, here's Vish at the New York Republican Club Gala in 2021. Check it out.
And if you are ever in doubt on how to win, how to defeat this encroaching tyranny through the everyday hustle of facing off against the high-tech struggle sessions of the online mobs that will inevitably lead to the high-tech lynchings, as Clarence Thomas so eloquently described it in his face-off against President Joe Biden, I leave with you a quote that General William Tecumseh Sherman wrote in a letter to James Guthrie, who would later to go on to be senator. War is the remedy our enemies have chosen. Other simple remedies were within their choice. You know it, and they know it, but they wanted war. And I say, let us give them all they want.
So yeah, he's really nice. And having had a couple of go-arounds with him myself on Twitter, the guy definitely means it when he says it's a war. Now remember, the enemy always gets a vote. It seems like Vish actually enjoys it, which is almost refreshing because so many of these people like to pretend they're not actually doing anything but defending themselves or defending their ideas. And, Vish doesn't do that. He makes it quite clear he's out to smash you and crush you. And at least in that regard, he's honest. So there is that. The funny part is that when Lindsay says these people are using communist tactics, he has Vish's number. And I think Vish knows it. Vish and Gavin Wax, who's a former president of the New York Young Republican Club, and now he's an FCC chief of staff, they took over what was the oldest Republican social club in the country that way. Here's a little clip of Vish talking about how to infiltrate institutions.
And so that's when I kept my eye on the New York Young Republicans and started participating more, coming around more, meeting everybody, meeting everyone who was committed enough to come to the Dead Club, right? And that's when and that's when I said, okay, you know what? There is an opportunity here, right? But it's not going to happen with the current leadership. So Gavin and I found a way to, eventually take it over. And the first thing we started doing was just doing at least 2 events a month. And so that's the approach that you had to take. And, because the old leadership was not only just disinterested in properly organizing events with high production value, but they were also just disinterested in finding innovative ways to promote it on social media and all the new channels and avenues that have been provided to you, by the powers that be that can be used for your benefit. They weren't doing that. We married up both, and now we have quite literally a political machine.
I mean, this is entryism, right? This is the stuff Leon Trotsky wrote about. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Lindsay is a pretentious dork, but he's got a point here. These people have a tremendous affinity for communists, if not communism. Who can ever forget Steve Bannon's famous "I'm a Leninist" bit? So that's the argument in a rather large nutshell. And I'm kind of a connoisseur of arguments that these people are having, and this is a really good one that we should encourage them to go absolutely scorched earth on each other over, especially now that both sides have managed to drag Israel into it, with the so-called woke right accusing their enemies of being absolute shills for IPAC in Israel, and throwing in a large dose of anti-Semitism in the case of Nick Fuentes and a few others.
You know what I want? Total Aryan victory. That's all I want.
White supremacist Nick Fuentes gets millions of views saying things like,
"The only way that we are going to make America great again is if we make this country Christian again." Yeah!
Now, looking at it from my perspective, the belligerents seem to be the principled conservatives on one side, and the MAGA folks who prioritize winning above all else on the other. And what they're fighting over is that very large group of influenceable people and their wallets. These people get their money from extremely smart rich people and extremely dumb poor people. And plenty of people have covered both sides of this, including us, but there's only so many of them, right? They know there's a limit to the number of boomers who are prepared to cash out their savings and spend it on the various shady ventures these people are backing. So these people get really territorial about it, and that comes out a lot of the time as tearing down the other side because you want to convince them that you're not like those other scumbag grifters. Now, here's the thing. If I had to bet money on how this is going to come out, I'd bet on the MAGA folks because they're hungrier, they're meaner, they're more grievance focused. These people really feel like the world has done them wrong. Remember, Trump is their instrument for retribution. They really actually believe this. And the reason this matters, any of this, is because it's a fault line. This isn't something that's going to get smoothed out. It's going to be a war. And there will be a ton of collateral damage and hurt feelings. This matters. In the words of Taylor Swift, Band-Aids don't fix bullet holes. And these people are shooting each other full of rhetorical bullets right now every single day. It's really important to realize that these people are not a monolith, and they are holding this coalition together with mean tweets and spit. Some of what's being said is causing rifts that simply will not fix. And the more time they spend fighting with each other, the less time they have to come up with truly horrible policy ideas and ways to make America more fascist. Personally, I'm in favor of wasting their time. Thanks for listening.